A federal appeals court has upheld a lower court ruling that prevents key parts of President Donald Trump's executive order on mail-in voting from taking effect in 23 states ahead of the 2026 U.S. midterm elections. The decision marks another significant legal challenge to the administration's efforts to reshape federal election procedures and has renewed debate over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. In March 2026, President Trump signed an executive order aimed at tightening mail-in voting procedures. Among its provisions were directives for federal agencies to assist in creating voter eligibility lists and measures affecting the handling of mail ballots. The administration argued that the order was designed to strengthen election integrity, improve voter verification, and promote greater confidence in the electoral process. Opponents, however, contended that the president lacks constitutional authority to impose nationwide election rules that are traditionally administered by the states and Congress. The First U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals declined to lift an earlier injunction that blocks the executive order from taking effect in the states that challenged it. The appellate judges concluded that the legal dispute should continue while the lower court's order remains in place. As a result, the challenged provisions of the executive order cannot currently be enforced in those states while the litigation proceeds. The ruling does not determine the final constitutionality of the order but preserves the status quo until the courts issue a final judgment. The Trump administration maintains that the executive order is intended to improve election security by ensuring that only eligible voters receive mail ballots and that federal agencies can support states in verifying voter eligibility. Officials argue that these measures are consistent with protecting the integrity of federal elections. The states that filed the lawsuit argue that election administration is primarily a state responsibility under the U.S. Constitution. They contend that the executive order exceeds presidential authority and could create administrative burdens and confusion ahead of the upcoming elections. The ruling prompted strong reactions from across the political spectrum. Supporters of the administration described the executive order as a reasonable effort to strengthen election procedures and indicated that the legal fight is likely to continue. Critics welcomed the court's decision, arguing that election laws should be established through Congress and state legislatures rather than by executive action. Voting rights organizations also emphasized the importance of maintaining access to mail-in voting while legal questions remain unresolved. Legal experts note that the case centers on constitutional questions regarding the separation of powers and the respective roles of the federal government and the states in administering elections. The courts will ultimately determine whether the executive branch has the authority to implement the challenged measures or whether such changes require congressional approval or state action. Because the case involves significant constitutional issues, many observers believe it could eventually reach the U.S. Supreme Court. For now, election officials in the affected states will continue operating under existing mail-in voting procedures while the legal process moves forward. The appeals court ruling reduces the likelihood of major changes to election administration immediately before the midterm elections, allowing state election offices to continue preparations under current rules. The Trump administration is expected to continue defending the executive order through the federal court system and may seek review by the U.S. Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court agrees to hear the case, its eventual decision could clarify the limits of presidential authority over federal election policy and shape future debates over election administration in the United States. The Federal Appeals Court's decision represents an important development in the ongoing legal dispute over President Trump's mail-in voting executive order. While the ruling temporarily blocks enforcement of key provisions in the states involved, it does not end the broader constitutional debate. As the case progresses through the courts, it is likely to remain a major issue in U.S. politics, drawing attention from lawmakers, election officials, legal scholars, and voters alike. The outcome may influence not only the administration of the 2026 election,